Hey everybody, what's going on? Dace here, and today we're going to be going over the X1 and X2 boss fights. They're kind of like sort of a boss rush mode, but anyway, they're not a part of the actual run. You access these in the short, or I think it was like shorts section or something of the menu there. So anyway, one reason I wanted to do these with commentary was because the more I play Barrage Fantasia, which is not too many times, I had my main phase when I first realized the game was on Switch, and then the last few days just banging out X1, 2, and 3. I'll do 3 in a separate video because that alone is as long as these two fights are together. But something has become more and more apparent, and that is that this game is, in my opinion, one of the best for learning micro-dodging and kind of getting into bullet hell and just crisscrossing patterns, bending, shifting patterns, all that kind of stuff. Like when I think about something like Mushihime-sama, which is amazing in its own way, and sure, like novice mode will still give people a challenge and they'll still learn a lot from that, but there's something about Barrage Fantasia where I think just with how big and chunky the sprites are, how slow moving things are, there's just something about it that feels really, really approachable. If I think about a newcomer, someone who's never played a bullet hell game, they've never dealt with patterns, this game is just kind of set up to make it very understandable in ways. Maybe that's how I'll word it. And beyond that, there's a lot to work with because you do have a lot of customizing you can do within the options before you start your run. So the way I'm doing it right now, I think I went with like Bomb, Advance, and Crow. Something like that. Anyway, so the way it works based on what I've selected is I have this like Crow friend that is, whenever I'm using my concentrated burst, obviously I'm getting a reduced movement speed, but I also have like those green laser wings coming out on angles from the bottom of the Crow, which is great because there are certain parts in some of these fights, and maybe in X3, so it might not be in here, but I know there's one part specifically where that kind of tool you have at your disposal is just super handy for something that creeps up from the bottom, and you can eliminate it before it turns into an issue. And so another thing I like about this, actually, which we just saw, is how you'll see where the attack is going to happen, because the boss kind of like spreads the wave of blue lights first, like right here. And so in ways like if this was any other bullet hell where the attack is just happening, and if you don't respond right away, you're doomed. In this situation, I like the fact that there are instances where you can see where something is going to be before the attack happens, and I feel that can be a really big learning tool for people just getting into this. As for resources, so I started with 1 green potion on the side, and that charges automatically, and that essentially is your bomb or your bullet cancel. It will cancel things out. Now, because I think I went with the bomb, or maybe it's called Bomb Plus or something, I don't recall, the green cloud that it leaves will also damage enemies, so that's a prime time to get like right up to the enemy, damage them, collect as many hearts to refill your health and all that kind of stuff. So I think just everything pooled together, from all the resources you have to work with, like I said, the big sprites, slow moving projectiles, everything is just so perfectly geared for learning bullet hell and micro dodging, like weaving in and out. Now, because it had been ages since I'd played, I was still getting used to the controls all over again, which aren't actually complex, but I'm sure you get what I mean. Just jumping in for the first time after a while, sometimes you're just getting used to the movement and all that kind of stuff again. So I do make a handful of sloppy mistakes, but yeah, I think in general, this more so than any other game. If someone asks, hey, like I want to get into bullet hell, or what's a great game for learning micro dodging and just getting more used to that kind of stuff, this is certainly one I would not necessarily say, oh, go and buy this right away without question, because like I never want people to just up and spend because I like a game. But this is certainly one that I would at least say, hey, give this a look. Maybe check out some videos, see what you think of it, and take these factors into consideration, because, yeah, like I said, this seems just like such a fantastic game for starting to teach those things. So I'm not gonna talk this whole time about that, because that's more or less the main point I wanted to get, and I would like to focus a little bit on the actual fights themselves. But there are a few other things, one specifically that I don't want to forget to mention, that really is another reason why I think this is fantastic. Unlike a lot of bullet hell games where you'll deal with all sorts of patterns, but at the same time, sometimes you won't really get much variety. Like, sure, you'll have all sorts of wild crisscrossing and dense patterns, but it'll kind of just feel like, okay, it's all very similar in ways. In Barrage Fantasia, you have an insane variety. You won't necessarily see everything that I touch on, because some of the stuff will be in the X3 video that I'll put out in a few days or whenever I get around to it. But just the sheer variety is off the charts, in my opinion. Like, you have projectiles, the orange colored ones, that you can destroy, and then that leaves another projectile at times, depending on the fight, of course. That's not always the case. And then you have like normal things like this where you can move around. In X3, there's a part where you have these large energy spheres floating down the screen, and there are other spheres, smaller ones, circling those larger energy spheres. So you've got to be moving in the tiny spaces in between as you jump from one big sphere to the next, and avoid all this chaos coming down the sides too. And I just think the kind of variety that is crammed into this one game is just incredible, because if you are looking to face off against some serious challenge for the first time anyway, this will give you such a broad range. Like, you will get a solid dose of experience dealing with all different types of situations, and I love that. Like stuff like that where the red ones were coming up from the bottom. Like, as we watch, you'll just see tons and tons of different examples. So yeah, this is the very end of the X1 fight. Each of these ones are like 9 minutes, and so this one was a little bit intense. I'm playing very sloppily, but essentially, because I haven't memorized any of this, I didn't really put any practice into these ones. I just kind of jumped in, banged them out, and then was fine with however they went. But the whole sword spinning around was tricky to get used to. But for those unfamiliar with the game, the main idea is that when you cancel out enemy shots, you get hearts, and you can replenish your hearts, as I mentioned earlier. So the whole strategy is to, or at least in this run, was to just bomb as often as I can to get hearts, to keep myself topped up so that I can just survive. And yeah, that was the first one, Devil Castle X1. But yeah, these are really, really fun fights. It's the kind of game where you can always go back to it, and it's exciting because it's a charming visual style, controls amazing, really creative bosses, enemies, all that. And like I said, the variety, like, you got so much customizing you can do. And I've barely even started dipping into that myself. I think when I start doing runs again or other things, I'll probably experiment a little more, or go for like some no miss or whatever the case is going to be. But I love this game. It's so fantastic. And I just love the mix of medieval fantasy and technology, like tanks and all that kind of stuff. It's just super, super cool. Here's another situation where the green wings of the crow, when you're holding down your focus shot, can be used to eliminate threats to the side and bottom. That is one thing I've always loved about crow. So if you completely dismantle the boss, you'll get an all break and you'll get a whole stash of extra hearts, which is sometimes crucial if you have a really sloppy boss fight, and you're like, oh man, then the next one up is going to be brutal. Then go for dismantling if you can. If it's something you can pull off, then that's going to push your health up a little bit. And that's actually another point when I think about it that I feel is fantastic, because for people just getting into this, you can challenge yourself even more by saying, okay, well, sure, I can beat the boss, each of these bosses, the fastest way possible, or I can see how I can start balancing, or managing rather, taking out like the side cannons or whatever the case is and eliminate those threats. And so in ways it starts, yeah, I suppose it is a way of balancing too, because you're learning how to just stay on top of everything. You're weighing what is the biggest threat, and that's going to be different for everybody. But let's say there's like a jet with side cannons, and they're just giving you a really hard time. Then it's like, okay, maybe drop a bomb right at the start of the fight, get rid of that first side cannon, get right over to the other side, take that out, and see how the rest goes. You might discover that, wow, it's so much easier when I just get rid of these parts. Or you may like the challenge of not dismantling anything and just doing the fight with everything coming at you. Another thing that, maybe I'll touch on that when I do the second video, but I can at least mention it now, is be aware if you're having a challenge with a final boss or anything like that, and there's a really insane pattern, be aware of if that is happening because you have dismantled, because there are bosses in this game where if you destroy all the like side components, the boss will go into like hyper mode and do a really, really nasty attack. It's not an actual hyper mode. I just mean to say the boss will enter a phase where their attack is just ruthless. Whereas if you had just left, well, let's say a shoulder cannon or whatever, they would not actually do that. And you can just polish off the boss normally without them ever doing that attack. So that's another thing to be aware of and experiment with and learn for any given game. But even stuff like this, it's just like, people may be intimidated by lots of bullets and things like that, but look at how slow this stuff is. You have all sorts of time, and you can technically touch, like, some of the, I'm not sure if we'll have an example here, but this is a great game for learning what parts of the projectile are actually going to trigger a collision and which ones aren't. And I think that's important knowing too, because there could be, like, let's say 2 large spheres coming down, and it might look like, oh, they're touching, they're solid, there's no way to go through the middle of that, but you actually might be able to without taking a hit. And stuff like that's super, super important when you have entire rings or lines coming at you. And you're wondering, like, how do I get through this? Or do I just get cornered in the very bottom and then I take a hit? Well, yeah, it's so crucial to just be aware of all these things and put as much into practice as you can. And always experiment. I honestly love this game. And even things like cutbacks, which I can get more into at some point, but yeah, there's just a lot of incredible situations. Like pretty much any fundamental you would want to learn, you're gonna face that. You're gonna face a situation where you can beautifully learn that in this game. It's just awesome. So anyway, for this boss, I'm just kind of focusing on the sidearms. I always find that to be the safest route. But I'm always aware of when I'm bombing and when I'm not, because the further you get in these X boss rush mode, or like boss rush style fights, the more you're going to want to have just more and more bombs and as much life as possible at the start of the fight, because things can get really nasty. Unless, of course, you're putting the time in, memorizing everything. Like I said, I didn't do that yet. But the game is fun enough that I would definitely go back, play more, and just improve. This was one of those fights where the first 1 or 2 times when I would get here, I would just lose sight of one of the orcs or whatever they are. And then suddenly it would be at the bottom of the screen, and it's just like, man, I'm taking hits. Like, what is going on here? And it just, you cannot be discouraged by stuff like that. You just got to be like, hey, this is all part of the process to figure out what is going on and how to manage the fight so that you can push yourself further. But, oh, this game is such a blast. I cannot get over how good this game is. If the dev did 100 games with this art style, these types of controls, I would not be complaining whatsoever. So this may look really intense, but you're just moving back and forth. Sometimes it is easier to just bomb and soak up some hearts. But as you can see, you're just kind of going back and forth slowly from side to side. Just getting used to things. Initially, I would mess this part up quite a bit, and then I just started to play it safe. Instead of going on the offensive, I would just kind of circle around a little more. More or less just to bide my time. I still take some hits, but it's like not too threatening because I'm at 2 hearts. And if there is a really big nasty attack where literally the whole screen is filled with bullets, then that's a perfect time to just have my my health bar skyrocket and maybe get that next heart. Yeah, perfect example. I'm about to get another heart. So I'm being really, really careful there. Oh, that was so close. But it's, oh yeah, it's just fantastic. Anyway, that's the end of X2. I trust you enjoyed this little chat. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. I always appreciate that. Yeah, you all have a stellar day. Thank you so much for checking this out, and we will see you next time.